Hello, readers by eyes and by ears. This is Marty Chan, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, we are continuing with the reading of Thousand Autumns, also known as Qian Qiu by Meng Xi Shi, and we'll be reading chapters 46 through 47. I hope you all enjoy. Also, please excuse my morning voice. It is 6:54 where I am right now, and I can't get back to sleep. Been up for an hour, so we're going to dig into this now because I want to read. Chapter 46, Between Life and Death. The gap between their martial abilities was stark, especially after Shen Qiao discovered the demonic core implanted in him. His emotions rampaged. His foundations were on the verge of collapse. The advantage he'd gained from striking first vanished completely. His sword glare was squashed. Its overwhelming brilliance faded into a dim glow, just like the near-extinguished flame of Shen Qiao's own life, flickering in the wind. Sang Jingxing had been astonished by how much he'd underestimated Shen Qiao at first, but his surprise didn't last long. When he saw Shen Qiao unable to continue, he laughed. The rumor said you lost most of your martial arts, and it seems they were right. Strange. Why didn't Yan Wushi drain your martial power dry? Instead, he left you to me. The power of his attacks was undiminished by his pause to speak. Where his carving dragon palms landed, his true qi transformed into a vague shape of a dragon. But this wasn't the usual merciful, benevolent dragon. It was full of savagery, and it roared toward Shen Qiao, its bloody maw gaping wide. Sang Jingxing didn't want to kill Shen Qiao just yet, so he only struck with most of his strength, not all. Even if he thoroughly shattered Shen Qiao's meridians and crippled all his limbs, he could still play with him for a while. The crazed dragon engulfed the sky, blotting out even the moon. The leaves vanished as the sky plunged into darkness, and the scene turned harsh and forlorn. And yet, the roaring dragon ground to a halt in midair, because a sudden, enormous burst of qi erupted from Shen Qiao. In the pitch-black night, a mass of light exploded out, impossibly dazzling, impossibly blinding. The light swelled with tremendous speed, growing larger and larger. It swallowed the bloodthirsty, murderous dragon in an instant, pulverizing it until nothing was left. Sang Jingxing didn't even have time to express his surprise. His face paled, and he pushed off the air itself, sharply reversing direction to retreat. But it was already too late. Shen Qiao shot off the ground, and from his hand, Shanhe Tongbei pierced towards Sang Jingxing with the momentum of raging thunder. It wasn't a flashy move, nor profound. It was only a straightforward thrust. As Shen Qiao moved, his body seemed as light as a feather, yet stalwart as a mountain. With almost impossible speed, he flashed in front of Sang Jingxing in an instant. Sang Jingxing felt a chill flutter down his back, as if a basin of ice water had been poured over his heart. However, he wasn't his disciple Huo Xijing, so Huo Xijing's death wouldn't play out a second time. He sent a palm strike at Shen Qiao while his other hand grabbed at the wrist of Shen Qiao's sword hand, but it was to no avail. Sang Jingxing felt an agony beyond compare, like his hand being minced. The true qi protecting his body was completely ineffectual in that moment. He could even feel the flesh of his palm being shredded off slice by slice. His face twisted, finally revealing a hint of terror and disbelief. He stared at Shen Qiao with the expression of one looking at a madman. "You destroyed your own foundations?" Nothing was more important to a martial artist than their foundations. They were cultivated bit by bit, year by year, from childhood to adulthood. There were no shortcuts to the process. Shen Qiao's foundation was his Taoist core. Destroying his Taoist core now said that he meant to die with Sang Jingxing. Sang Jingxing was stronger, but if they kept going, there was no way he could win unless he wanted to stake his all on the fight and pay the same price, to destroy the entirety of his martial arts. Of course, Sang Jingxing was not willing to do that, so he chose to turn and withdraw. But the true qi erupting from Shen Qiao had already scoured away both of his palms. In just a moment, they'd become a mess of mangled, bloody flesh. The agony was utterly unbearable. He really was a madman, an utterly hopeless madman. He gritted his teeth but wavered. His movements slowed just a whit, and in that moment of hesitation, the massive shock wave from Shen Qiao's self-detonation smashed straight through his true qi. The sword glare gouged deep into his chest, leaving behind a gash that cut him bone deep. Ah! Sang Jingxing screamed involuntarily. No longer hesitating, he turned and fled immediately. However, the fierce and brilliant sword intent was already descending behind him, fully formed as it engulfed both heaven and earth. Shutsun, Shutsun! When Ah Yu and Ah Ying were practicing the Azure Wave sword technique just now, their pose for the last move was different from yours. Why didn't your esteemed self correct them? Because point your sword up is only an approximate description. There's no rule that says how far up. Is it by 1 inch or 2 inches? Ah, Chow, this is true for practicing martial arts, and it's true for the kind of person you want to become. Don't fixate on the rules. That will only limit your depth and breadth of mind. Swaddled in many layers, the child wobbled as he walked, but he still persisted in grabbing the robe of the tall figure before him. His expression said he didn't really understand, but it still brimmed with admiration and the desire to cling. The figure saw how he refused to let go and smiled, then crouched down and picked him up. They walked together. There are many people in this world, some of them good, some of them bad, but even more can't be categorized as simply good or bad. Their thoughts may be different than yours, and the path they choose may also be different, just like Yu Ai and Yuan Ying. The same sword technique, but differences still arise when each uses it. You mustn't reject others just because they're different from you. As a person, you have to be like an ocean that embraces the 100 rivers, tolerant and broad-minded. The same holds true as a martial artist. The narrow-minded are limited in what they can achieve. Even if they reach the summit, they won't be able to stand there for long. Then what about Ah Qiao? Said the child. Is Ah Qiao good or bad? His round eyes were as black as pitch, yet crystal clear. Within them was reflected the image of his dearest person. A hand immediately stroked his head. It was warm and dry, like balmy sunlight cradling his body. My Ah Qiao is the cutest. The child became a little shy at this gratifying answer, but he couldn't hold back a bright smile. But that warmth suddenly vanished, and the surrounding scenery shattered, including the person holding him. He was still on Xuandu Mountain. On a long-gone day at Hanan, I planted a willow so tender and fair. Today at the riverside I found it withered, the picture of woeful despair. Even if the trees diminished, could people be any different? If even the scenery could change with time, could people escape? He was already the same height and the dearest companion who chased after him, wanting to be called Shixiong. He stood before Shenxiao, grieving and frustrated as he said, Shixiong, nobody wants to wallow in solitude. Xuandu Mountain is clearly the world's #1 Taoist sect, and it has the strength to support an enlightened ruler who can help Taoism influence the world. So why must we act like hermits and hide ourselves away in the mountains? Everyone on Xuandu Mountain agrees except you. You're the one who's being too naive. Was that so? Was it really because he was so naive? He'd only wanted to protect the place Shutsuan and the previous sect leaders left to them, to protect his martial siblings, keep them safe from the flames of war, and far away from the scheming and intrigue of the Jianghu. Was he wrong? Yes, you're wrong, someone said to him. You're wrong because you never understood the human heart. You thought that everyone in the world was like you, lacking desires, lacking aspirations. Do you think they'd be content with the same carefree lifestyle? Human beings are evil by nature. No matter how deep their love runs, the moment you get in their way, they'll eliminate you without hesitation. Have you really yet to realize that? People as naive as you are doomed to live short lives. Without Xuandu Mountain, without Qifengge's radiance, you're nothing, and you're capable of nothing. My venerable self doesn't need friends. Only one kind of person is qualified to stand as my equal, an opponent. You destroyed your own meridians? You're destroying all your avenues of retreat? You're completely mad. All those past affairs, all those voices crumbled in the aftermath of those words. As if everything had returned to the beginning, excruciating agony burst through his entire body, as if someone were continuously grinding a dull knife against his bones, as if hundreds of thousands of ants were burrowing through his flesh. He'd always considered his pain tolerance enormous, but at this moment he yearned to release a tortured moan and to drench his face in tears. He even wished that he could stab a sharp sword through his own heart just to cease this endless torment. But what he perceived as his screams and howls were merely a mosquito's buzz to the ears of others. Shen Langjun, are you awake? The voice was very soft and faint, as if it came from a great distance away. In truth, the speaker was on his belly next to Shen Chao, but Shen Chao's current condition made it difficult for him to tell. He tried with all his might to answer the voice, but in the end, he could only twitch a finger. The other person saw this and whispered to him, Shen Langjun, you can hear me, right? Then I'll speak. You need only listen. If you can hear me, just move a finger. Shen Chao did so quickly. He could tell that it was the voice of the young boy priest from Bailong Monastery, the abbot's junior disciple, Shiwu. Sure enough, he said, I'm Shiwu. I found you 2 days ago when I was picking herbs on the mountain. You were lying inside a cave, barely breathing, and your whole body was cold as ice. It really scared me. I couldn't move you by myself, so I had to go back and tell Shifu so he could carry you back. Now Shen Chao remembered as well. He'd destroyed his martial arts, prepared to take Sang Jingxing down with him. Although he didn't succeed, he'd gravely injured Sang Jingxing, giving himself the chance to escape. He'd hidden in the nearby Bailong Mountain, thinking his death was certain and imminent. But unexpectedly, Shiwu had found him. He wanted to ask if Sang Jingxing had shown up, if Shen Chao had embroiled them in more trouble. But even after struggling and struggling, he couldn't make a single sound. His eyelids were quivering violently. It was obvious how anxious he was. Shiwu noticed and quickly found him a cup of water. He held it to Shen Chao's mouth, letting him drink bit by bit. The cool water trickled down his throat, moistening it. After a long moment, Shen Chao finally felt much better. He opened his eyes and, just as he'd expected, he saw nothing but darkness. He thought it was his eyes, but Shiwu said, We're in Bailong Monastery cellar, and no lamps are lit. That's why it's pitch black. Shen Chao opened his mouth, and there was a rasping sound so hoarse he could scarcely recognize himself. Did anyone come looking for you? His body was so weak that he could only force each word out one by one. The task was arduous and grueling. Yes, said Shiwu. The Duke of Pengcheng's men came twice, probably as revenge for the donkey meat sandwich incident. Luckily, Shifu's foresaw it and moved us down here ahead of time. The monastery is so run down, there wasn't much for them to smash. They came in and looked around and couldn't find anyone, so they left. They probably thought we ran away. When he reached the end, a laugh sputtered out of him. I'm sorry, said Shen Chao. No, Shen Langjun, said Shiwu. You mustn't say that. He seemed to sense Shen Chao's misgivings, for he quickly continued. Do you remember? That day in the Xiang province capital, your esteemed self gave your share of flatbread to a child. He thanked you and kowtowed, and said he wanted to set up a longevity tablet for you. Once another wave of searing bodily agony slowly abated, Shen Chao pushed himself to remember. A vague impression rose in his mind. You're that... Shiwu was a little frail, but he looked calm and tidy, fair and tender, practically a different person from that jaundiced, emaciated child in his memory who'd looked barely human. Yes, that's me. After all, Father wanted to trade me for another kid to eat, but Mother refused. She did everything she could to stop him. She said she'd sell herself instead, if he'd only leave me and my younger siblings alone. Father agreed, but just a few days after he traded Mother away for food, my brother and sister fell sick, one after the other, and died. Shiru's voice choked up a little. Father thought I was dragging him down and wanted to cook me, but luckily, that's when we met Shifu. He paid for me with a bag of flatbread and took me away, so I went with Shifu to live in Bailong Monastery. My original name didn't sound good, so Shifu gave me a new one, Shiru. Shiru wiped away his tears and grabbed Shen Chao's hand as if trying to comfort him, but he didn't dare clutch too hard in fear of hurting Shen Chao. I've always remembered your kindness. If not for that piece of flatbread, I might not have lasted long enough to meet Shifu, so please don't say that you're sorry. Even if your esteemed self hadn't saved me, how could I leave you when I saw you lying there on the verge of death? Shen Chao's hand trembled. the corners of his eyes glimmering with tears. Perhaps it was from Shiwu's words, or because he'd recalled some old memories. Shiwu thought it was because of the pain and hurriedly said, "Are you in a lot of pain? I'll go get Shifu to bring you some medicine." The abbot arrived just in time to hear Shiwu and grumbled, "What medicine? I just brought some a moment ago. Do you think medicine is free?" So he said, but he still came over, picked up Shen Qiao's hand, and began taking his pulse. "Your meridians are all destroyed, no internal energy whatsoever. What exactly did you do to turn yourself into this? You can forget about practicing martial arts ever again." The abbot clicked his tongue. "Shifu!" Shiwu panicked, afraid that it would be too much for Shen Qiao to hear. The abbot rolled his eyes at the boy. "Why are you being so soft? He hasn't even said anything yet, and you're already panicking for him. I'm not the one who destroyed his martial arts." Sure enough, Shen Qiao didn't speak for a while. Quietly, Shiwu said, "Shen Langjun, don't be sad. Shifu is a great doctor." "Hey," said the abbot. "Say, you're not some virgin maiden who's about to get married. So why are you always siding against your own? When have I ever been a great doctor? I just have some basic understanding. Basic! Get it?" Shiru grabbed on the hem of his robe. "Shifu has a harsh tongue, but a gentle heart," he said sweetly. "He's actually a very kind person. Amazing, too." "You little brat," said the abbot derisively. He turned to Shen Qiao. "Your injury's too serious. I'm no medical expert, and we won't have all the herbs you need here. I can only do my best, but there's nothing I can do about your martial arts. Your foundations are completely gone. This isn't something that can be reversed through human efforts." Shen Qiao suddenly asked, "May I ask if there's still poison in my body?" "Poison? What poison?" The abbot was bewildered. "I didn't find any poison when I took your pulse." To double-check, he once again placed 3 fingers over Shen Qiao's wrist and observed. After a moment, he withdrew his hand. "Your injuries might be grave, but I didn't find any sign of poisoning." Ever since Shen Qiao had been poisoned with joyful reunion, it lingered on inside him. Even Yan Wushi had been unable to do anything about it. The poison had pervaded his bones and blood, flickering between active and dormant. It always impeded the recovery of his martial arts and made his attempts at cultivating internal energy ineffectual. His eyes had also suffered. They'd never fully healed. But now the abbot said there was no poison within him. He destroyed his martial arts, fully prepared to take Sang Jingxing down with him. Yet, that very descent into certain death ended up saving his life. It even drove the poison out of him completely. Did this count as a blessing in disguise? Shen Qiao's lips tugged faintly upward in a wry smile. The abbot walked in carrying a candlestick, which he placed next to Shen Qiao. He saw the slight curve of Shen Qiao's mouth and said, bewildered, "You can still smile in your awful state?" The abbot twisted around and asked Shiru, "Say, do you think all the awfulness broke him and turned him into a fool?" "Shifu!" Shiru sorely wished he could cover his master's mouth. All right, said the abbot. "I won't say anything more. That congee should be finished boiling by now. I'll go take a look. It's so strange not having the little brat Chu Yi here to order around." As the abbot walked away again, he clicked his tongue. "Finding that old piece of ginseng took so much trouble. I couldn't even bear to eat it. And now an outsider is getting the whole thing." "Please don't take it to heart," Shifu said apologetically once the abbot was gone. "Shifu has always been like this, sharp-tongued but tender-hearted. He's not good with words, but everything these last 2 days has been thanks to him. I really wouldn't know what to do otherwise." "I know," said Shen Qiao. "I'm not crazy either. Is this cellar connected to the outside? I think I see light." One by one, he forced out his words arduously. "Yes," said Shifu. "Shifu bored 2 holes in the wall so some light can shine in. Your esteemed self can see now?" "Gradually. I can see a little, but it's not very clear." "Please don't worry," said Shifu. "Shifu said that the cellar is very well hidden. It'll be hard to find. The Duke of Pengcheng County's men came twice and didn't find us either time. So they just left. Shifu said that in a little while they'll think we moved and they won't come anymore." "Thank you." Shifu laughed. No need to thank me. Your esteemed self should rest well. Don't worry, and focus on getting better. I'll go boil some water for you. The place was dark and sunless, but it was quiet and excellent for recuperation. Shirwu said that Bailong Monastery had been built during the Han Dynasty's final years, which made it over 300 years old. Though it withstood the flames of war time and again, the bustle and incense it once seen was no more. All that was left was a sacred monastery, forsaken by all. By the time Shirwu Shifu had moved in, it was already completely empty. The cellar was connected to a tunnel, likely dug when the monastery was built. When Shirwu Shifu discovered it, it became a fantastic place to seek refuge. Shunqiao spent another 2 days in a dazed sleep. Sometimes his mind was clear, sometimes it was a jumbled mess. In the small hours, when he woke up from his dreams, he'd find himself back in the past, so much so that he felt like he was still on Xuandu Mountain, as if just by opening the doors, he would be able to see Shitsuan standing outside, watching the disciples practice. But of course, it wasn't real. The past could never return, and the people who were gone were gone. It seemed those wonderful, peaceful years were left behind on Xuandu Mountain, forever gone. What followed them were all he'd experienced since: betrayal, setbacks, and dilemmas. The many countries warring with each other, seeking wealth and fame. The sects all plotting against each other, each clinging to their own views. The common people groaning in their hell, struggling, unable to escape. Suffering so ghastly, so unbearable. It was like he'd gone through it all himself. There was only one reason you were able to faithfully follow your Taoist core and refuse to give up on your so-called principles. It's because you've never been in a situation so hopeless that you could no longer endure. Am I right? Yan Wushi had asked him once. Shen Chao once again recalled his words. He remembered their interactions bit by bit. He'd thought that they were friends once, but that notion hadn't withstood a single blow of the other's mockery and scheming. But even if he could start over, Shen Longjun, are you feeling better today? This is rice congee with mountain ginseng, freshly cooked. Shifu said that it'll be a great way to help you recover. Oh, no, Shen Longjun, why are you crying? Does it hurt that much? Beneath the feeble light, sparkling beads slowly, soundlessly slid from the corners of Shen Chao's eyes and into his hair. Hastily, Shifu put down the kanji and flung himself over. I'll go call Shifu. No need. With great effort, Shen Chao reached out and grabbed the boy's robe. Shifu yelped in surprise. You can move now? He said with undisguised joy. Shifu said that your meridians were totally destroyed, so you probably wouldn't recover. Not for the rest of your life. Looks like Shifu was only trying to scare me. Shen Chao smiled at him. While he was awake, his every bone screamed in agony, enough agony that he wished for death, right there. But he'd borne it, silently reciting lines of the Zhuyang strategy that he'd studied. With this, something rather surprising had happened. Back when he'd been studying the Zhuyang strategy, he already had Xuandu Mountain's martial arts as his foundation, so it wasn't too difficult to pick up. But no matter what he did, his progress remained slow and steady, and even Qi Fengge couldn't uncover the reason. Tao Hongding had already passed by then, so Qi Fengge couldn't ask him for an explanation. All he could do was let his disciple fumble along on his own and offer the occasional suggestion. But now, with all his meridians damaged and his true qi lost, the Zhuyang strategy brought about something completely unexpected. His shattered dantian began recovering at an unbelievable speed, and his ruined meridians began to remold themselves, nourished by the Zhuyang strategy's true qi. It looked possible that, before long, his injuries would be completely healed. The Zhuyang strategy was truly incredible. It had combined the strengths of all three schools of thought. Even though Shen Chao had only studied 2 of the volumes, he could still see how profound and extensive its wisdom was. The structured righteousness of Confucianism, the gentle clemency of Taoism, the solemn insight of Buddhism, each of them became as tiny streams trickling through his body. Shen Chao didn't know if he'd stumbled upon a lifeline in the face of certain death, But his body grew better day by day, and the speed of his recovery astonished even the abbot, who'd deemed him a lost cause. Considerately, Shiwu didn't ask him why he'd cried, but Shun Chao took the initiative to reach for him. Thank you, Shiwu. Shiwu was confused and a little embarrassed. Your esteemed self has already thanked me many times. Shun Chao treated others with kindness, but he'd never felt entitled to their kind treatment in return. After all, he'd act the same regardless of whether they repaid him. Everything he did was because he wanted to do it. It had nothing to do with whether other people understood him, approved of him, or mocked him. Looking at things from this point of view, he and Yan Wushi were the same. But in the end, Shun Chao was only human. He didn't have a heart as pure as snow, nor a spirit as sturdy as iron. He, too, grew tired and disheartened and felt pain. This thanks is different, he said. You've recovered so much already, Shiwu smiled shyly. Shifu said you should start eating meat. He bought a chicken today to make some soup. Shun Chao was apologetic. You've spent so much on me. Once I'm healed, I'll go and earn some money. Shifu laughed. You don't have to worry about that. Actually, Shifu has secretly saved up quite a stash. He just refuses to use it, so he keeps pretending to be hard up. Shifu, are you itching for a beating? How can you badmouth your Shifu in front of other people, you treacherous little bastard, ungrateful disciple? The abbot had come in just in time to hear Shifu talking. Shifu stuck out his tongue. This disciple, sorry. Please don't be angry. How did I think you were more well-behaved than Chu Yi? Roared the abbot. Each of you is more disappointing than the next. Good-for-nothing disciples. Shifu obediently listened to the master's admonishments and bowed respectfully, his manner childishly sweet. Once the abbot's temper finally calmed a little, he began complaining about his senior disciple. There's a fair on the north side of the city today. Chu Yi ran off early in the morning and still hasn't returned. Look at how wild he is. If he could sprout wings, he'd probably soar right to the heavens. Perhaps Shishong found something delicious and is bringing some back for us. Bringing back my ass, said the abbot. He only has a couple coppers. He won't even have enough to buy something for himself. Suddenly, a bell rang in the cellar. The tiny bell's chime was very faint, but the abbot, standing right next to it, heard it immediately. It was a simple mechanism. The bell was attached to a string that threaded outside, its other end tied somewhere around the front gates. Whenever someone entered, the movement would jostle the string, notifying the cellar's inhabitants right away. Shixiong has returned, said Shiwu cheerfully. The boy was about to head out, but the abbot grabbed him. Wait, he said. Something's wrong. The moment these words left his mouth, Chu Yi's bubbly, vivacious voice came to him from outside. Shifu, Shiwu, I'm back. Who are you? The abbot paled. This was bad. Chapter 47. Interrogation. After Shun Chao had humiliated him, Cheng Gong sent men to the monastery twice. The first time, they were courteous, claiming they wanted to invite Shun Chao to the Duke of Pengcheng's residence as a guest. They refused to believe that Shun Chao wasn't there, so the abbot let them search the entire monastery before they left, angry. The second time, they weren't so courteous. They swaggered in with great arrogance. Cheng Gong understood Shun Chao fairly well and knew he disliked dragging other people into his problems, so he'd commanded his men to apprehend the abbot and his two disciples and take them away. Shun Chao was sure to show up at Cheng Gong's door himself after that. But the abbot anticipated this. He took his two disciples and hid inside the cellar, leaving Cheng Gong's men empty-handed. They figured the priest must have absconded the previous night. At a loss, they could only report back. Chu Yi had never been as quiet as Shiwu. After a few days in the cellar, he was already anxious to leave. The place was dark, the air musty, much less comfortable than staying above ground. The city happened to be holding a fair just then, so Chu Yi pleaded and wheedled for hours before the abbot finally relented and let him head out to visit the fair. The abbot even warned him not to return too early. But there was no escaping fate. Although Chu Yi had kept his arrival back at the monastery as quiet as possible, the newcomer was a skilled martial artist. It was impossible to escape their notice. When they spoke, Shun Chao's expression fell. Do you live here, young priest? The newcomer said. Who are you? Asked Chewie. 2 holes had been bored into the cellar so that the inhabitants could breathe. The people who'd first built the place gave it a very special design, though the people within could hear noises from without. It was very difficult for those outside to find the cellar. Seeing Shen Qiao's expression, the abbot mouthed, Who is he? Shen Qiao covered his mouth, forcing down his urge to cough. Then he dipped his finger in some water and quickly wrote a few words atop the table. Xiao Se, member of He Huan sect, Yuan Xiuxiu's disciple. I was injured during a fight with Sang Jingxing. It was true that Yuan Xiuxiu and Sang Jingxing were at odds with each other, but they were also both from He Huan sect. Regardless, Xiao Se's sudden arrival wasn't likely to mean anything good. Shiwu was still a little confused, but the abbot understood. His frown deepened, and his complexion took on a pale tinge of green. When Shen Qiao had first begun lodging here, he took the 3 for ordinary Taoist priests. Only when the abbot took his pulse did he realize the man was probably from the Jianghu too. But the identity of the abbot didn't matter anymore. What did matter was that Xiao Se had shown up at the monastery. It wasn't possible that he was there with good intentions. Most likely, he'd come for Shen Qiao. My name is Xiao Se, they heard him say. His voice was gentle, more like a guest than someone who'd come looking for trouble. Young priest, have you ever met a man named Shen Qiao? I haven't. Xiao Se laughed. Young priest, you can't even lie. Tell me, where is he? I don't know, Chu Yi said loudly. Who are you? Hurry up and leave, or my Shifu will beat you to death when he gets back. Xiao Se wasn't at all put off. If you don't tell me, I'll have to bring you back to Elder Song, he said softly. He's in a terrible mood nowadays. He's already killed 3 of his beauties, and I was just worrying that his esteemed self wouldn't have anyone left to take his anger out on. Don't do something so foolish for little old Shen Qiao. In the cellar, Shen Qiao struggled to get out of bed while the abbot held him down firmly. His strength was so great, Shen Qiao couldn't shove him off. Listen to me. He dropped his voice low, his mouth pressed to Shen Qiao's ear as he spoke. He Huan sect revel in slaughter. They won't let Chui go just because you show yourself. You'd only end up in trouble together. You stay here and look after Shiwu. I'll go. Shen Qiao knew the abbot was right, but he couldn't imagine hiding in safety while someone else bore the brunt of what should have been his responsibility. He shook his head. Just when he was about to say that he'd save Chui at all costs, the abbot moved with lightning speed, locking his acupoints. Then he swiftly fished an object from his lapels and shoved it to Shen Qiao's hand. If anything happens, take Shiwu to Bixia sect on Mount Tai. Tell them that their good-for-nothing disciple, Zhu Lengquan, accepted his own disciple while out in the world. Let Shiwu return to his sect and forefathers. When the abbot finished, he also locked Shiwu's acupoints. I didn't press too hard, he said to both of them. They'll undo themselves in about a quarter of an hour. I've entrusted Shiwu to you, Shen Gongzi. Remember, this is your duty now. Then he stood and left the cellar, never looking back. The way out of the cellar led in many different directions. To prevent Xiao Se from discovering the entrance, the abbot purposefully took the path to a different room, then walked outside from there. It's in the middle of the night. Who's going around disturbing people's sleep? He stretched as he walked out, drowsiness written all over his face. Who are you? Why are you clutching my disciple? Shifu! Xiao Su's hand was clamped around Chu Yi's shoulder. When the boys saw the abbot, tears just about streamed down his face. Are you the master of this monastery? Asked Xiao Se. I am. And who are you exactly? The abbot frowned. If my disciple has offended you, I apologize as his master. Please let him go. Xiao Se didn't release Chu Yi. His gaze swept over the sword in the abbot's hand, and he smiled. Where is Shen Qiao? Who's that? I've never heard of such a person. Xiao Se narrowed his eyes. We're both intelligent men here. Playing the fool won't do you any good. Say, if I crush your disciple's shoulder, will he cave to the pain and call out to the one you're hiding? He tightened his grip, causing Chewie to howl and scream. The boy began paying his respects to 18 generations of Xiao Se's ancestors using all sorts of popular vulgarities. Stop! No longer hesitating, the abbot drew his sword. The edge trembled slightly as he lunged at the other man. Xiao Se kept hold of Chu Yi, but his movements weren't slowed by the boy in his clutches. His other palm struck out as he muttered, "This is your Shifu's matter, but you dumped the responsibility onto me. If you keep out of it now, you'll just have to demand Shen Qiao's whereabouts yourself later. After all, this young priest is quite decent looking. Bringing him back will be sufficient for my report to Shifu." From above and to the side, a delicate laugh rang out. "Xiao Shixiong, your Shifu might be the sect leader, but her influence in the sect doesn't even compare to my Shifu's. I say you should just switch sides and join mine instead." Xiao Se snorted and didn't reply. The abbot's expression, however, fell drastically. 2 more people appeared in front of him, accompanied with laughter. One of them wore white, and her appearance was tender and sweet. This was Bai Rong, whom Shen Qiao had met many times. As for the other person, though his head was shaved, he was no monk, for his clothes were even more extravagant than the average rich young master. It was a terribly incongruous combination, but the abbot didn't dare look down on him on account of his strange clothing because he knew who this person was. It was another problematic member of He Huan sect, Yan Shou. He had a moniker, the Buddha with the blood-soaked hand. Though he possessed the dignified appearance of a Buddha, his heart was as savage as a demon's. His hands were thoroughly blood-stained, and no one knew how many lives they were laden with. Yan Shou wasn't as deranged as Huo Xijing. He loved to skin people's faces day in and day out, but he'd taken just as many lives. It was obvious now. Shen Qiao had injured Sang Jingxing gravely, so he hated Shen Qiao to the bone. Naturally, he sent his disciples to look for him. If it had been only Xiao Se, the abbot thought, he still might have been able to force a retreat if he gave it his all. But with 2 more, it was now 1 against 3. He couldn't hold on to that hope any longer. "Give us Shen Qiao," said Yan Shou. Though he barely moved, Chu Yi went from Xiao Se's hand to Yan Shou's in the blink of an eye. Chu Yi knew little of martial arts. Some mild torture was enough to flood his face with tears as he cried, "Shifu, save me!" But no matter how he wailed, he didn't say where Shen Qiao and Shiwu were. The abbot felt like his heart was being torn open, and he put aside any concerns about his lack of strength. With a twirl of his sword, he thrust forward. But Yan Shou didn't meet him. Bai Zhong did. Blessed with incredible talent in martial arts, her skills grew in leaps and bounds every day. She was at a higher level now than when Shen Qiao had last seen her. Her blue lotus palms transformed into hundreds of thousands of lotus flowers, all blossoming around the abbot. As she pierced each of them one by one, they rebloomed, growing and multiplying endlessly, perhaps infinitely. Sweat trickled down the abbot's forehead. He could still manage Bai Zhong on her own, but Yan Shou and Xiao Se were on the sidelines, so the pressure on him was immense. He knew very well that even if he could beat back Bai Zhong, the other 2 might attack at any time. And if he withdrew now, he might be able to escape intact, but Chu Yi was in their hands. It was impossible for the abbot to abandon him. Yan Shou saw this weakness, and his grip on the boy tightened. "Where is Shen Qiao?" Chu Yi let out another wail of pain. The abbot's heart trembled, and his hands quivered in tandem. Spotting an opening, Bai Zhong slammed one of her palms into his chest. He hacked up blood, stumbling back 3 steps. "I don't know any Shen Qiao. How unreasonable can you lot be to attack us the moment you arrive? The 2 of us have been living peacefully in this broken-down place, and we've never offended anyone." Suddenly, Xiao Se laughed. "Elder Yan, look at his moves. Don't they look those from, like, Mount Tai's Bixia sect?" Said Yan Shou. "There is indeed some resemblance." "Why would someone from Mount Tai's Bixia sect run away here and conceal his identity? Perhaps a disciple who'd been expelled?" The abbot made his decision. Gritting his teeth, he let out a cold laugh. "That's right. I'm Zhu Leng Quan from Bixia sect. The current sect leader Jiao is my Shizhi. If you have any relationship with Bixia sect, please let me and my disciple go. I'll be sure to ask the sect leader to express our gratitude someday. Xiaosi burst out laughing. I'm sorry, but we must disappoint you. We don't have any dealings with Bishao sect. Furthermore, you'll bear a grudge for what happened today regardless. So why don't we settle this matter a little more absolutely to avoid further issue? Right as he finished, Yanshou slammed his palm down onto Chuyi's head. Blood streamed from Chuyi's mouth and nose. He didn't even have time to make any noise. He simply fell to the ground without a sound. Chuyi! The abbot's eyes bulged as grief ripped his heart in two. Unthinking, he lunged at Yanshou with his sword. Yanshou didn't move. Xiaosi did. Xiaosi spread his fan, and the blades, tucked against its rib, sprang forth, gleaming with a shiver-inducing cold light. With the flick of his wrist, the folding fan itself flew at the abbot, circling him as if it had a mind of its own. Seized with heart-rending grief, the abbot's level of swordplay surged to new heights. Back during his days at Bishao sect, everyone had thought that his aptitude was mediocre, and he'd done nothing to dissuade them of the notion. Instead, he spent his days loafing around. That was why he'd never mastered the last few moves of 19 moves of the Eastern Mountains, nor could he ever satisfy his master and elders. But if Bishao sect's previous generation could see his swordplay now, they'd be completely astonished. This didn't look at all like someone with mediocre aptitude. His sword glare spilled forth relentlessly, the blade undulating with a dazzling light. The sight of it would have had Chuyi yelling and cheering, going, Shifu! I've never seen you look so majestic! But Chuyi was dead. He'd never speak again, never bother anyone again, never loaf around and slack off ever again. The abbot's eyes were bloodshot. Every swing of his blade brimmed with icy, murderous intent. But even before his sword glare could pierce through the blades of Xiaosi's fan, it was knocked away. One moment of carelessness later, the fan's blades sliced the long gash into the abbot's wrist, and he involuntarily loosened his grip. The sword fell to the ground with a clang. As Xiaosi withdrew his hand, he jabbed his elbows into the other man's chest. Then, when the abbot stumbled backward, Xiaosi grabbed his shoulder and yanked him forward again. In an instant, he'd sealed 3 major acupoints on his chest, and the abbot collapsed into a kneel, unable to move. You've already seen it. This isn't an empty bluff. Your disciple is already dead. Surely you don't want to follow him, Xiaosi was smiling brightly. Just how charismatic is Shen Qiao that you're willing to risk your life to hide him? The abbot spat a mouthful of foamy blood at him. Pah! What, Shen Qiao? I already said I don't know him. Can you not understand human language? Xiaosi's smile faded. He pulled a handkerchief out of his sleeve and wiped the bloody foam from his face. Then, quick as lightning, he sliced off the abbot's left ear. With his mute acupoint struck, the abbot couldn't even scream. He could only open his mouth and glare desperately at Xiaosi with rounded eyes. Xiaosi squatted so that their gazes were level. You've already had a taste of what He Huan sect is willing to do. Is Shen Qiao really worth throwing your life away like this? If you tell us his whereabouts, we'll let you live. It'll benefit all of us. He waited a long while before unsealing the abbot's mute acupoint. The abbot panted, his breath shuddering. Blood still dribbled from where his ear had been. He was in a wretched state, almost too awful to behold. I already said I don't know any Shen Qiao. Xiao Shuxiong, why waste your words on him? Baizhong cut in, smiling. If he's trying to hide someone, he must be hiding him inside the monastery. Why don't we simply search the place? Then, to Yanshou, she said, No need to trouble Elder Yan for this. Xiao Shuxiong and I will look. Yanshou neither spoke nor moved, giving her his tacit approval. Baizhong first went into the room the abbot had exited earlier. After a moment, she came out and said, I didn't see any mechanisms inside. I'm certain they didn't hide him there. Xiaosi searched several other locations and found nothing either. The monastery might have been dilapidated and falling apart, but the one point in its favor was its sheer size. It'd take quite some time to find someone who'd hidden themselves in one of its many crannies. even without considering that most of old monasteries came with concealed escape tunnels. Yan Shou grew tired of wasting time. "I'll give you a quarter of an hour," he said. "Tell us by then, or die." The abbot said nothing. A quarter of an hour passed quickly. Baizhong and Xiao Se returned one after the other, both saying they'd found nothing. Xiao Se glanced askance at Baizhong. "Bai Shimei, you searched quite a few places. Did you perhaps see something but deliberately said you didn't? I remember you had quite the relationship with Shen Xiao." Baizhong didn't get angry. She laughed. "What a strange thing for Xiao Shishong to say. What relationship could I have with Shen Xiao? If a fight constitutes a relationship, then Xiao Shishong has quite the relationship with Shen Xiao too, no?" "You—" Yan Shou frowned. "Enough!" He turned to the abbot. "Will you talk?" The abbot gave a cold, sneering laugh. "You lunatic beasts. Forget that I don't know Shen Xiao. Even if I did know him, I wouldn't tell you. Not after you killed my disciple and did this to me. You think you can do whatever you want just because you're stronger? Pah! Kill me if you can. One day, you'll get your retribution." Yan Shou slammed a palm down onto his head before he could finish the word. The abbot's skull split and fresh blood poured down. It streamed past his glaring eyes, which were still fixated on Yan Shou, before finally dribbling into his collar. Even in death, his eyes remained wide open. Mere inches lay between the bodies of master and disciple, but they could never come any closer. Yan Shou didn't give the corpse a second glance. He turned to Baizhong. "Did you really not find anything?" Baizhong was completely unaffected by his piercing gaze. "I really didn't find anything," she said, still smiling cheerfully. "If you don't believe me, Elder Yan and Xiao Shishong can take another look. Perhaps I missed something." Down in the cellar, Shun Chao's and Shiwu's acupoints had come undone. Shiwu trembled all over, tears streaming down his face. Shun Chao kept his hand clamped tightly over the boy's mouth, preventing him from making a single sound. Though he was in tears as well, he still dragged the boy backward with all his might. Shiwu had struggled like mad at first. He'd fought and fought right up until the abbot was killed. Then, like he'd lost the last sense of strength, he stopped resisting and let Shun Chao drag him away. The two of them stumbled and tripped as they walked down the dark tunnel. Shun Chao's grave injuries hadn't healed, and his meridians weren't fully repaired. Shiwu was barely lighter than Shun Chao. Dragging him made every bone in Shun Chao's body burst into pain. It was like iron chains were tearing at his flesh. Every arduous step took everything he had. He didn't know how long they walked. Perhaps it wasn't very long at all, but Shun Chao felt like half his lifetime had passed. He pushed open the sealed stone door with a trembling hand. Who knew when this door had last been used? He pulled Shiwu out, then groped for a hidden latch in the grass. Following the abbot's instructions, he closed the door from outside. With this, even if Yan Shou and the rest found the secret passage and chased them all the way here, they still wouldn't be able to open the stone door. The secret passage connected to the other side of Bailong Mountain at its foot. This bought them enough time to find somewhere else to hide or to escape without too much hurry. After securing the door, Shun Chao let go of Shiwu. Then he leaned on a rock and burst into a coughing fit. His body felt like he'd gone through a torture chamber. He lacked even the strength to stand. It was only after he hacked up a couple mouthfuls of blood that the stuffiness in his chest eased up a little. Meanwhile, Shiwu was still immersed deep inside his grief. He'd curled up, holding his knees against himself and burying his face in them, sobs shaking his entire body. Shun Chao sighed and stroked his head. "I'm sorry. If not for me, Zhu Xiong and Chu Yi wouldn't have met such a terrible fate. Let's get away from here first, though, all right? Even if it's for our sake. Once we're safe, I'll let you hit me and kill me however you wish. Anything you want." Shiwu raised his face, still sobbing. "Shifu and Chu Yi can never come back to life, right?" Shun Chao's eyes brimmed with tears, but he clenched his teeth, refusing to let them fall. His mind trembled, and another surge of salty, sweet blood rose in his throat. "Yes, they can never come back to life, but their greatest wish was that you go on living. If you let those people capture you, how can you do right by them?" Shiwu didn't make another sound, but continued weeping silently. After a long while, he stood on shaky legs. You're right. I must live on. I can't make Shufu worry. Where are we going? Shen Chao drew a deep breath, then rasped. To the east, to Bixia sect. I'm taking you back to your sect and forefathers. He groped for the object the abbot had shoved at him earlier, a small wooden plaque. On one side was carved the words Bixia sect, and on the other was a single character, Ju. It must have been the abbot's proof of identity back at Bixia sect. After gently stroking the plaque for a while, he handed it to Shiwu. This is something your Shifu left to you. You must keep it safe. For a long time, Shiwu only looked at it with a cherishing gaze. Then he gave it a few more strokes and carefully slipped it into his lapel, as if afraid he'd lose it the moment he stopped paying attention. Shun Chao took the boy's hand and led him away. The two of them waded through the bush, continuing onward. Shiwu couldn't help but glance back the way they'd come. Behind them, the stone door lay tucked beneath layers and layers of dense vegetation, hidden securely away. It was like it never existed. Tears streamed down Shiwu's cheeks once more. Shun Chao squeezed his hand tightly. Bixia sect was on Mount Tai, and Mount Tai was in Dongping Commandery. One could travel straight through Ji province to get there. But Shun Chao was afraid that He Huan sect would guess where they were going, so he took Shiwu southward into Liang province. It was a long detour that almost doubled the length of their journey. Shiwu became quiet and reserved, no longer his former shy yet friendly self. He rarely spoke when they encountered other people. Shun Chao knew what the trouble was, but he also knew his advice wouldn't solve it. All he could do was wait for Shiwu to resolve it himself. The abbot had hidden some copper coins in the cellar. Though it wasn't much, with some frugality, it would be enough to last their entire journey to Dongping Commandery. They hurried along during the day and stayed inside the cities at night. If there wasn't a city nearby, they did their best to search for one of the livelier towns. As the saying went, a true hermit secludes himself within the markets. The more people they were among, the less likely they were to be found. Evening fell as they strode into western Yan province. Shun Chao found them an inn to stay at inside the city. There was just one bed, so he gave it to Shiwu while he himself meditated, cultivating. After he'd rebuilt his foundations with Juyang strategy, Shun Chao seemed to enter an entirely brand new, completely unknown world. A world that possessed scant inches of space, but where every detail shone clear. With his heart tranquil and at peace, the beautiful mysteries of nature made themselves apparent. True qi flowed through his damaged meridians, sending pain twinging through him. But it came with regeneration. Even the many traumatic injuries he'd suffered in the past seemed to slowly heal. This was what was truly profound about the Juyang strategy. Where his inner awareness reached, the light of dawn dappled the trees as the bright moon sank behind rooftops. The plum flowers concealed divine secrets as they furtively ripened into bloom. Jukui, Zhongting, Huagai, Xianji. One by one, his blocked acupoints and damaged meridians were made clear again. The stuffiness and muffled pain that had long choked his chest slowly faded too, bit by bit. Shun Chao's eyes were tightly shut. He was completely aware that another pair of eyes had been secretly glancing his way. Wrapped in his blanket, Shiwu, who'd supposedly dozed off some time ago, lay motionless. He was pretending to sleep, but his eyes were just open a crack. So he saw Shun Chao, who'd been fine only a moment before, suddenly hack up a mouthful of blood. Everything else flew from his mind as he threw aside his blanket and rolled off the bed, dashing to Shun Chao's side. "What's wrong?" he cried. "Are you all right?" Shun Chao opened his eyes and shook his head with a smile. "This is stagnant blood. It's best to cough it up." Shiru's eyes glistened with tears. "You don't need to comfort me. I know you didn't buy any medicine during our journey, all to save money. Your injuries were so terrible when I saved you. You were almost on the verge of death." "It's true that I avoided buying medicine to save money, but I'm already slowly recovering by using my internal cultivation. I'll be fine, regardless of whether I take medicine." "Really?" Shun Chao stroked his head. "Really. I promised your Shifu to take good care of you, so I won't leave you alone." Shiru threw his arms around Shun Chao and started bawling. I wasn't ignoring you on purpose. I was only just too sad." Shun Chao's eyes prickled with moisture. "I know. He patted Shiwu's back gently. I'm sorry. Shiwu shook his head. Please don't say you're sorry. It wasn't your fault. Shunchao smiled bitterly. How was it not my fault? They came to kill me, and all of you were dragged into it. They were so savage. It turned out the same if you weren't there. As long as they thought Shifu was hiding you, they'd kill him just the same. Shifu chose to save you, just like I chose to save you. None of us blame you for it, so you shouldn't blame yourself either, all right? The one who should be punished are the evil people, not the good people. Shunchao's heart was pained and grieved. Jushong, oh Jushong, he thought to himself, your spirit in heaven can surely rest seeing Shiwu so mature and thoughtful. Would you like to learn martial arts? He asked Shiwu. Shiwu nodded. I want to study martial arts properly. That way, I can get revenge for Shifu and Chu Yi. I can teach you Xuandu Mountain's martial arts on the way to Bixia sect. How about it? Shiwu's eyes shone. Xuandu Mountain? The #1 Taoist sect in the world? That Xuandu Mountain? Shunchao nodded. Were you a disciple of Xuandu Mountain, Shun Langjun? Yes, said Shunchao, smiling. I am Shunchao, a personal disciple of the 6th generation sect leader of Xuandu Mountain, Qi Fengge. Shiwu gasped. I think I heard Shifu mention your name before. You used to be a sect leader, right? Shunchao stroked the boy's head some more. Yes, it's a long and complicated tale, so I won't tell it to you just now. But I came to Yecheng to look for some Xuandu Mountain disciples who were heading north. But who could have expected? He paused, then continued. Who could have expected that I'd meet Sang Jinxing? What happened after, you already know. Shiwu said awkwardly. But Shifu once told us every sect's martial arts are close-kept secrets, never to be revealed. You can't learn their martial arts unless you join the sect, and I've already promised Shifu that I'd go to Bixia sect, so... Smiling, Shunchao said, whether it's Xuandu Mountain or Bixia sect, martial arts exist for people to learn them. If both teacher and the student care little for the differences between sect, why cling to such rules? I'm only teaching you martial arts. You don't have to take me as your master. He then took out Shanhe Tongbei, unraveling the tightly wound black cloth that disguised as a bamboo cane. He peeled off each strip of cloth, layer by layer. Shanhe Tongbei? Curious, Shiwu read the characters carved upon it. When the common people suffer, the mountains and rivers grieve in pain. The grass and trees hold souls, all within heaven and earth's eternal reign. Shunchao spoke slowly, running his fingers over the sheath. Suddenly, he clutched the hilt and swiftly drew the sword. His wrist barely twitched, but the room was brimming with a brilliant radiance in an instant. The sword's glare seemed to stretch to every corner, its murderous intent dominating every space. Like cranes calling and soaring high above, or wild geese cutting through the snowy passes down below. But then another second passed, and the brilliance vanished, returning to nothing. The room was still the same. The sword was still the same sword. It was as if the vision had only been Shiwu's hallucination. Shiwu was frozen there for a while, gaping. He looked completely dumbfounded. Shunchao smiled at him. Go touch that robe. He was referring to his own outer robe. As it had been soaked by the rain on their way here, he'd removed it and hung it upon the wooden rack in their room. The moment Shiwu's fingers touched the robe, a sound of surprise escaped him. The robe disintegrated into tiny flakes which drifted to the floor. Save for the robe, everything else in the room was completely unaffected. Shiwu's expression went from dumbfounded to utterly stupefied. What do you think? Amazing! A laugh sputtered from Shunchao. I was asking if you wanted me to teach you martial arts. Shiwu nodded convulsively. Praise be to Shunshi! Please accept Shiwu's respects. All right, everyone. That concludes the reading of chapters 46 and 47 of Volume 2, Thousand Autumns. And I have to say, I am extremely sad and yet relieved and hopeful all at the same time. I just feel like Shiwu's story is so incredibly sad, even though, it's going on the up and up, I suppose. But knowing where he came from as far as his family being homeless and his exchange with Shunchao and then ending up with his Shifu, it's so sad that he got to experience his Shifu and Chuyi being slaughtered like that, whether he was able to see fully through those holes or he just listened to that, agonizing stuff. I feel so, so sad for him. But I'm happy that he and Shen Shao were able to escape. I'm happy that even though Shen Shao's meridians were destroyed, the Zhuyang strategy is healing him and he can still practice martial arts. Yay. So I look forward to seeing how the rest of their journey to Bishasek goes. And yeah, I mean, gosh, this was a sad chapter with some hope in it. Does that make sense? But my heart.